Welcome to this explainer. For 2 whole years, the narrative in the tech world was pretty simple. The United States had built this totally unassailable fortress around artificial intelligence. Nobody could touch them. But today, we're exploring exactly how that fortress was suddenly and violently shattered.
To really grasp the stakes here, we have to listen to the architects of American power, folks like Eric Schmidt, Henry Kissinger, and Daniel Hutton-Loescher. Back in late 2024, they made it absolutely crystal clear. AI is no longer just some commercial tool. It is the new currency of national power. It's literally what dictates economic prosperity, military dominance, and global leverage. But even back then, they were warning us about a ticking clock.
So let's jump right into part 1, the fortress falls, and how exactly the U.S. monopoly cracked.
Which brings us to part 2, the brute force playbook, otherwise known as America's legacy strategy. Up until early 2025, Silicon Valley operated with this absolute, unwavering confidence in their AI dominance. And for the last decade, their strategy was entirely based on sheer scale. We're talking throwing massive, mind-boggling billions at top-tier Nvidia chips. The investment disparity between the US and China pre-2025 was just massive. The US government completely doubled down on this advantage too. They used export controls on those highly advanced H100 and H200 chips as a weapon, basically trying to indefinitely starve China of the hardware they needed to even compete. And the logic made perfect sense on paper. If you can't buy the hardware, you can't build the model, right? But, well, history has a pretty cruel sense of irony.
Moving right along to part 3, the DeepSeek earthquake. This was a complete paradigm shift in AI.
Picture this. It's January 27th, 2025. Out of absolutely nowhere, this obscure Chinese startup named DeepSeek drops their R1 reasoning model. And in doing so, they prove that US sanctions actually backfired and forced China into hyper-resourceful innovation. $6 million. Let that sink in. That is the jaw-dropping total reported cost to train their entire R1 model. And they pulled this off using legally available older chips, totally bypassing the sanctions and completely embarrassing the US giants who were spending hundreds of millions, sometimes billions, on massive superclusters. It is a staggering difference in efficiency.
And the fallout? Oh, it was instantaneous. The market reacted with absolute terror. In a single day, Nvidia, literally the golden child of the AI boom, had nearly $600 billion wiped off its market cap. It was a historic, catastrophic wipeout. And why did it happen? Because investors suddenly woke up and realized that the US strategy of relying entirely on sheer computing power and massive energy grids might actually be fundamentally flawed.
Let's really break down this Sputnik moment. On one side of the ring, you've got America's legacy strategy, scale and compute. This relies on limitless money, massive power grids, and those top-tier Nvidia chips. On the other side, you've got China's breakthrough, algorithmic efficiency. Chinese labs figured out ways to distill data, heavily optimize memory usage, and use reinforcement learning to make their models leaner and faster on older legacy chips. The massive financial barriers to entry into the AI race? Yeah, they have officially collapsed.
So, part 4, panic in Washington. Let's take a look at the immediate policy reaction.
First up, the Biden administration scrambled to implement the AI diffusion rule. This was a sweeping 3-tiered system. Step 1 gave unlimited US chip access to close allies, places like the UK and Japan. Step 2 slapped strict computing power caps on the rest of the world, specifically targeting the Middle East and Southeast Asia. And Step 3 was all about strictly enforcing that export compliance. It was an incredibly aggressive move to try and lock in dominance. Though, it's worth noting that critics from major companies like Nvidia and Oracle warned this might actually backfire, potentially pushing those capped nations straight into buying Chinese chips instead. Then, reacting to the rapidly shifting landscape, the Trump administration immediately pivoted to a massive infrastructure blitz they dubbed Project Stargate. We are talking about a staggering $500 billion joint venture alongside OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle. The ultimate goal here is to build a literal Iron Dome of US data centers by 2029. It's an astronomical sum of money, and it is aimed entirely at rebuilding that physical computing fortress around American AI.
But here's the really uncomfortable reality of these two very different approaches. America is spending $500 billion just to maintain the status quo and hold on to its fragmented lead. Meanwhile, China is taking a totally different path. They are smartly embedding AI directly into their core national infrastructure. They're integrating it with their national energy grid and their manufacturing base to create this highly efficient, interwoven ecosystem.
Let's pivot to Part 5, the open source wildcard and the democratization of intelligence.
Because Beijing actually isn't the only threat to American hegemony here. A massive global disruption is happening right before our eyes. Open weight models from places like France's Mistral, Meta's Llama, and China's Alibaba Qwen are now performing at about 95% of the capability of top-secret, closed American models like GPT-4. And that tiny 5% gap? Well, it basically means the secret sauce of Silicon Valley is now public property. Anyone, anywhere, can download this near-frontier intelligence for free and just run it locally on their own machines.
And driven by this massive democratization, plus the ongoing trade tensions, we are witnessing a rapid supply chain decoupling. Chinese firms are moving aggressively. They are stockpiling memory chips, significantly ramping up their own domestic production of high-bandwidth memory, and building entirely new AI ecosystems completely isolated from the U.S. financial system. They are achieving rapid technological self-sufficiency way faster than anyone predicted.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 6. The new global duopoly. Welcome to a multipolar future.
So, the era of American AI exceptionalism? Yeah, it's dead. We have officially entered a very tense marathon two-horse race. To summarize this brand new geopolitical reality, the United States absolutely still retains the money, and they hold the lead in foundational research and raw chip design. But China holds incredible momentum. They lead in practical application, national integration, and incredibly lean algorithmic efficiency. The US has the funding for sure, but China has proven, beyond a doubt, that they can do way more with far less.
So we have to end this explainer with a really provocative question. Intelligence just isn't a scarce resource anymore. The monopoly has been fundamentally broken. And just as the Cold War was defined by who had the nuclear warheads, the 21st century is officially being defined by silicon and synapses. In a world where all the old barriers to entry have fallen, who truly controls this new nuclear code? It's going to be a marathon of adaptation from here on out, and the fuse is officially lit. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the data.